Stephanie White, you tried it. You tried it. Carl Semesco he had his senses. He came out and talked about, yo, we just couldn't stop Caitlin. It's a lot to deal with. She's one of the best guards. Alicia Gray was trying to match and trying to do what she could do, but it's a lot. It's a lot. That's what Carl Semesco came out and said. We're going to get to him. Stephanie White tried to make this thing about Kelsey Mitchell at the podium. That was ridiculous. That was ridiculous. Somebody must have got to you before you got to that locker room. And when that camera was on, they said, hey, man, you better talk about Caitlin. I don't know what you talking about. Somebody had to talk some sense.
Something strange happened after the Indiana Fever's latest hard-fought victory. The biggest story should have been Caitlin Clark putting together another remarkable performance and helping her team survive a pressure-filled game. Instead, the post-game conversation immediately turned into a debate over who deserved the credit, and that is where the tension surrounding Stephanie White suddenly became impossible to ignore. Clark finished with 26 points, including 12 points in the third quarter alone, while repeatedly taking control whenever the Fever needed someone to create offense. The opposing defense was constantly forced to adjust because of her ability to score, pass, and manipulate defenders. Yet when Stephanie White spoke after the game, she appeared to emphasize Kelsey Mitchell's contribution instead. That decision immediately raised eyebrows. Mitchell finished 9 of 22 from the field, and while she eventually made some important shots, this was hardly the kind of offensive performance that normally dominates a post-game discussion. The criticism became even louder because Clark had spent much of the game carrying Indiana through difficult stretches. Then came the comments from the opposing side. Carl Semesco openly acknowledged how difficult Clark was to contain. He explained that Alicia Gray had a major defensive assignment trying to slow Clark down, but dealing with a player of Clark's caliber was simply a huge challenge. That honesty stood out, because while Clark's opponent was openly recognizing the problem she created, Fever fans felt their own coach was strangely reluctant to give her the same level of recognition. And this is where the story gets bigger than one post-game press conference. Over the last several games, Clark's floor game has reportedly reached another level. She is no longer simply hunting shots from deep. She is controlling the pace, finding teammates, moving the defense, and creating opportunities before defenders even realize what is happening. That development may actually be more important than her scoring. Clark has become the engine of Indiana's offense. When defenses collapse on her, she finds the open teammate. When they give her space, she shoots. When the game slows down, she creates. And when the pressure reaches its highest point, she has repeatedly shown that she can take responsibility. The numbers highlighted in the source are especially eye-catching. Over an 11-game stretch, Clark was averaging 26 points and roughly 9.5 assists while shooting around 50% from the field, 41% from three, and 87% from the free throw line. Those are not ordinary numbers. They are the numbers that force people to start asking a much bigger question. Is Caitlin Clark now firmly in the MVP conversation? And if she is, then Indiana has to make a decision. Do they continue trying to distribute the spotlight evenly? Or do they fully embrace the fact that Clark has become the player driving this team forward? Because the opponents already seem to understand it, and the fans certainly do. The question is whether the Fever coaching staff is ready to admit it. Part 2. The most interesting part of this entire situation is that Caitlin Clark does not need to say anything. She does not need to complain. She does not need to demand more attention. She does not need to tell the media that she is carrying the team. Her basketball is doing the talking for her, and that is exactly why the post-game comments created such a strong reaction. Clark's impact was not limited to the 26 points on the scoreboard. She was controlling the entire floor. Defenders were worried about her shooting, which opened passing lanes. When defenders stayed attached, she used that attention to create opportunities for teammates. And when the defense finally gave her a little room, she was ready to punish them. That is what elite offensive gravity looks like. One of the biggest examples from the game came when Clark created enough pressure throughout the contest that she eventually found herself with significant space for a major three-pointer. That space did not simply appear by accident. It came from the attention she had commanded throughout the game. This is the part that makes the current discussion around the Fever so fascinating. Indiana does not simply have a young guard who can score. They have a player who can change the way an entire defense has to operate. And opposing teams know it. Carl Semesco's comments made that clear. Alicia Gray had a strong performance herself, but she also had the exhausting responsibility of dealing with Clark. Every possession became a test because Clark can hurt a defense in multiple ways. That is why the idea of minimizing Clark's contribution becomes difficult to defend. At the same time, another Fever player quietly became an important part of the story. Michaela Simpson provided the physical presence Indiana needed and, according to the source, had a strong battle against Angel Reese. She brought energy in the paint and helped the Fever compete physically during a game that demanded toughness. But once again, the conversation returned to rotation decisions. The criticism from fans was that some of the substitutions seemed difficult to understand, particularly when players providing defensive stability were taken off the floor while other weaknesses remained exposed. Whether every criticism is fair or not, the larger issue is obvious. Indiana's fans are watching every decision closely, and that pressure is only going to increase if Clark continues producing at this level. The Fever cannot hide from the expectations anymore. Clark's recent stretch has changed the conversation around her. Earlier in the season, some people might have dismissed MVP talk as premature. Now, with elite scoring, elite playmaking, efficient shooting, and increasing control over games, the argument has become much harder to ignore. The biggest danger for Indiana is not Clark. It is failing to build around what Clark is already showing them. When the game gets tight, the ball needs to find the player who can create the most problems for the defense. And right now, that player is Clark. The victory may have been a team effort, but the biggest question coming out of it is simple. Is Indiana ready to let Caitlin Clark truly take the keys? Because if the answer is yes, this team could become much more dangerous. And if the answer is no, the tension between Clark's growing dominance and the coaching philosophy could become one of the biggest stories surrounding the Fever. Part 3. At this point, the Caitlin Clark story has moved beyond one game. It has become a question about the identity of the Indiana Fever. For weeks, Clark has been showing that her game is evolving. She can still explode as a scorer, but now she is doing something even more valuable, controlling games without always needing to dominate the shot attempts. That is the sign of a true floor general. She is reading defenses, moving the ball, creating openings, and understanding when to attack. And when Indiana needs a big shot, she still has the ability to take over. That combination is extremely difficult to defend. The source highlights an 11-game stretch in which Clark averaged 26 points, around 9.5 assists and nearly 4 rebounds while shooting approximately 50% from the field, 41% from 3, and 87% from the free throw line. If those numbers continue, the MVP conversation is no longer something fans are simply creating on social media. It becomes a legitimate basketball discussion. But there is another side to this story. The Fever have to make sure individual milestones never become more important than winning. The criticism surrounding Kelsey Mitchell was largely connected to the perception that Indiana was trying too hard to keep her scoring streak alive. Mitchell is an important player, but forcing shots simply to reach a personal scoring benchmark can disrupt offensive rhythm. That is especially dangerous when you have a player like Clark capable of creating offense almost whenever she wants. The answer should not be about choosing Clark over Mitchell. It should be about making the decision that gives Indiana the best chance to win, and that means trusting what is actually happening on the floor. If Clark is drawing double teams, use that attention. If defenders are giving her space, let her shoot. If teammates are open because the defense is collapsing, let Clark create. That sounds simple, but it requires the coaching staff to fully trust the player who is making those reads. The fascinating thing is that even the opposing side appeared to recognize Clark's impact. Semesco did not try to hide behind vague explanations. He acknowledged how difficult it was to deal with her, and how much pressure she put on Alicia Gray in the defense. That kind of respect says a lot. Opposing coaches are preparing for Clark as the central problem. The Fever need to do the same, because Indiana is entering a stage where every game is magnified. Every substitution is questioned. Every offensive possession is analyzed. Every post-game quote becomes part of the larger conversation, and that pressure will only grow if Clark continues playing at an MVP-level pace. The good news for Indiana is that Clark appears completely focused on basketball. She is not letting the noise control her. She keeps playing. She keeps creating. She keeps producing. And eventually, that becomes impossible to ignore. The Fever may have won the game, but the bigger victory could be the realization that they have a player capable of changing the franchise's trajectory. Caitlin Clark does not need the coaching staff to manufacture a narrative for her. The numbers are already there. The performances are already there. The attention from opposing defenses is already there. And the fans have already made their decision. Now it is up to Stephanie White and the Fever to decide what they want this team to become. Because when you have a player capable of taking over a game, you do not spend your time wondering whether she deserves the keys. You put the ball in her hands and find out just how far she can take you. And if this recent run is any indication, the answer could be much farther than anyone expected.